The year was 2008, a magical year for comic book fans at the theater, because for the first time, a beloved hero was coming to the big screen. Of course, we could only be talking about one movie, and it ain't Iron Man. So grab your fedora and get ready for a whole ton of narration as we set out to prove that the spirit, it's not that bad. Welcome to It's Not That Bad, the podcast that looks for A grades in B movies. Now, we've got a special treat for you because we're going superhero styles, and we're going with one that you might not expect because we're not touching the MCU, we're not touching the DCEU. We are going to 2008's The Spirit. Now, 2008, we mentioned at the beginning of the show, that's a magical year because that is literally the beginning of the MCU. But we're going the opposite direction on this one. And joining me in our quest to find good things in bad movies today is my wife, Carrie. Welcome to the show, Carrie. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm great. Thanks. How are you?
I am good. Now, for those of you who listen to the show, you'll know that whenever Carrie's on the show, we kind of do two episodes back to back, and that's because she gets to pick a movie and I get to pick a movie. Well, this was my pick. Now, for you, Carrie, what was it? When I said we're going to do The Spirit, were you excited? Were you confused? Were you worried? What was your reaction?
Oh, I hate to admit that I was in the camp of, oh, it's awesome. It's going to be exactly like Sin City. But visually, yes. Story-wise, not so much. But we'll get into that.
We'll definitely get into that because there is a lot. We're going to be saying Sin City a lot in a podcast that's not really about Sin City. But again, for later on in the show. Now, for those of you who have never seen The Spirit, you're probably not alone because the movie didn't do all that well at the box office. But before we get into just how well or not well it did do, it's time to take The Spirit and trailerize it.
This city holds 1,000 stories, too many for one town, and definitely too many for one movie. Enter the Spirit, a man with seemingly no soul, as he jumps from dame to dame, trying to get the dime on his arch nemesis, the octopus. And where there's an old flame, there's fire, and if you aren't careful, she'll fire on you. Gabriel Macht wears a suit of a different kind as he puts on the mask and claims the mantle of back from the dead cop Denny Colt. Samuel L. Jackson is all fire, no fury, as the no-tentacle octopus. And with more actresses than a Maxim year-end special, with writing to match, The Spirit, rated PG-13.
Okay, so we mentioned some of the actors in that. Let's do a rundown kind of who's in this. And we have to start with Gabriel Macht. As we mentioned in the trailerize, he plays the Spirit, and most people will remember him from the TV show Suits. It also stars Samuel L. Jackson as the Octopus, Scarlett Johansson, another Marvel reference, as Silken Floss, Eva Mendes as Sans Serif. People might remember her from Hitch, The Other Guys, and The Cleaner, another movie that she starred with Samuel L. Jackson in. And Sarah Paulson, who played Ellen. You might remember her from American Horror Story, or American Crime Story, or Mrs. America, or American Gothic. Yes, these are all movies on her, or TV shows on her IMDb. Sarah Paulson is Miss America. It's directed by comic book legend Frank Miller. Now, here begins the talk of Sin City because aside from all the good comic book creation work that he has done, 300, Sin City, he was also listed as a director on City, and a lot of that is thanks to Robert Rodriguez. And that happened because Robert Rodriguez had to jump through hoops to get him to be a director. So much so that Rodriguez had to leave the Directors Guild Association in order to get Frank Miller as listed as a director on Sin City, that also meant Robert Rodriguez had to step down from directing John Carter. So kind of a win on that one. Now, this of course leads me to want to wonder what a Robert Rodriguez directed John Carter movie would look like. But that's speculation for another day. It didn't do that well at the box office. It had a $60 million budget, but it only grossed $39 million worldwide. Released on Christmas Day 2008, so maybe not the best day, because there were a lot of movies actually released that weekend. The Spirit, on its debut weekend, finished 9th. Out of the top 10, it debuted in 9th with only just under $6.5 million. Number 1 was Marley and Me. So feel-good movie during a feel-good time. Bedtime Stories was number 2. The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, number 3. And Valkyrie, also known as the Tom Cruise Nazi movie, number 4. So the fact that those 4 debut movies did much better than The Spirit, it kind of goes to show there was probably a lot of confusion by people who saw the trailer or had expectations of Sin City 2, like you said yourself, and then got there and went, oh, this is not that.
It's true. It is not Sin City, 100%. Although filmed on the same film set.
Absolutely. I think it's one of those, maybe it's, you had an expectation of what it was going to be, or what you thought it might be, and then you get there and it's not. And that might be reflected in the tomato meter. Now, the tomato meter. The ever dreadful tomato meter. Currently, The Spirit sits at a 14% tomato meter with a 25% audience score. So not a huge swing, but 14%, that's for a, not necessarily a big budget, because $60 million, I mean, it's a decent enough budget, but it's not a huge, Star Wars Avengers level budget, but it's still a decent budgeted film. 14%, too harsh?
And for the lineup. I mean, the cast in this movie alone deserves more respect than 14%. Come on, people.
Samuel L. Jackson deserves your respect. Now, I do have to point out, as I was doing my research, there is another. There is another Spirit movie. Never made to the big screen. It was made for television back in 1987, starring Sam J. Jones. Most people will remember him as Flash Gordon, and most people not my age will probably remember him as the guy from Ted, who was the actor in Flash Gordon. And then Nana Visitor, who played Kira Nerys in Star Trek Deep Space Nine. She played Ellen, which is the Sarah Paulson character in this. I have seen clips of this made-for-TV movie, and it looks like a made-for-TV movie starring Flash Gordon. One day we will sit down and we will watch this whole thing. You can actually find it on archive.org.
What year was it released?
1987. So almost
20 years.
Almost 20 years. Like 21 years. 21-year difference. But yeah, that's there is a marked difference in production quality. But let's get to the breakdown of this. And we start with the acting. So Carrie, I'm going to go to you first, and we're going to start with the Spirit himself, Gabriel Macht. What was your thoughts on him?
I think he played it well. I really respected the scripted dialogue. I think it was a great story. I think he played it well. He was mysterious. He was in very much in the pocket of the role. He was good. Yeah.
I think for me, I didn't have him down as on my list of good acting in this. And I think part of it may not necessarily have been him, but maybe the direction that he was given. Because there were times when he was going straight film noir, 1940 serial kind of feel. And then there were times when he'd break the fourth wall and it had that almost, in hindsight, Deadpool-esque kind of feel. But of course, Deadpool wasn't around then, so we would have to say a very Ferris Bueller's Day Off kind of feel. And it kind of pulls you out a little bit, I think, of the setting.
The narration was good. But I think I agree that it's almost like the minute he started addressing the viewer, it kind of lost something. And I almost think because this movie visually very much looks like and is edited like if you were reading a graphic novel or a comic book, the scene switches, I think it would have been better served as like a thought bubble on the screen.
Yeah.
Or a narrator.
The narration works because, yes, comic book characters, inwardly emote and philosophize, and we get to understand that because, of course, it's all in, text boxes in the pictures. You don't get the text boxes, you get the narration in the film, which is fine, right? And while, yes, I get that there are occasionally comic book panels where the character is looking, straight at basically the reader, it's a very different thing in film when a character breaks the fourth wall and talks straight to the character. So I understand that maybe that's Frank Miller's comic book sensibilities in this, but it didn't so well. But Gabriel Macht did have, I think, the right tone for Denny Colt. I think he had the right voice for the spirit. I just think there were things in the direction that kind of pulled me out of his performance. But the arch nemesis, Samuel L. M. F. Jackson, was just a delight to watch. Samuel Jackson's at that stage in his career where he can do pretty much anything he wants and does do anything he wants. And those are always fun moments in an actor's career. This felt like one of those moments where he was just he was basically told to go play. Go play and be Samuel L. Jackson and soak every scene. And it worked for this. He
was. And from my understanding, he was very much involved in the look of the octopus, in the, costume choices and everything from, his 8-tiered tattoos, 4 on each side, to make him really look like the octopus. Interestingly enough, in the actual comic, the octopus character has never actually been seen. He was always represented with purple gloves, and that was it. So
kind of like a Dr. Claw thing.
Yeah, but I think that allowed and gave Sam Jackson it gave him the opportunity that the sky is license, the limit.
Yeah.
He can really create this character, and I think he did a great job.
See, now I'm trying to picture Dr. Claw in the spirit.
I'll get your next time, spirit. Next time.
There's something to be said about the time frame that this was kind of set in. The original Spirit comic came out in 1940. And when you think about, bad guys back then in serials, and even, a couple decades later in, the Adam West Batman series, you had these grandiose monologuing villains with these big set pieces and just over the topness about it. And it's clear that that's kind of the vein that they wanted the octopus to be in. They wanted him to be this big... It's interesting. They wanted a Saturday morning cartoon villain with a Sin City setting. And, Samuel L. Jackson pulled off Saturday morning cartoon villain very, very, very well. Full credit to him. And it was a joy to watch. Like, whenever someone's having fun, it's like watching a band, right? If the band's having fun, the crowd's going to have fun. If the actor's having fun, the audience is going to have fun. It looked like Samuel L. Jackson had a ton of fun in this. And then counterpoint to him was Scarlett Johansson, who as Silk and Floss, played the yin to the yang. And I think for her, while hers was a more subtle Saturday morning cartoon villain, it was the perfect counterpoint to him. Because let's be honest, no one was going to over the top Samuel L. Jackson in this. Scarlett Johansson didn't need to, but needed to play, to have that call and answer, to have that banter back and forth, to create that villainous team.
Oh, she did it so well. She held her own. She was the perfect mix of sultry and smart, and she was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
She very much plays the smartest person in the room, even though she's not the evil mastermind. It's kind of funny how that plays out. Really, at the end of the day, she's the one that kind of, spoiler alert, she's the one that kind of, sets up what could be a Spirit 2 if it had done well, and be able to, pick up the pieces literally and figuratively from the octopus failing. But on the other side of things, you had Sarah Paulson as Ellen, and as a film noir, not siren, but almost like a Florence Nightingale type character, like, the person who helps put the spirit back together, the love interest, the unrequited love interest, even though, she's going up against a dame hound like the spirit, right? She was really fun to watch and really fit that, again, film noir 40s 50s serial kind of feel to it.
I think she was also very grounded in her role. It was clearly a pivotal role, and she just helped the story move along. And I think she played it really well. She was great.
I want to hear your thoughts on Eva Mendes as Sans Serif, which, for the record, the character name does sound like a font. I cannot get past that. But I enjoyed her in that there was just like a badassness to her. But I don't know if the character fit the film noir style, even though Sans Serif is a regular character from the Spirit comic books. Did Eva Mendes work for you as Sans Serif?
I think she was great. I really enjoyed the way the screenplay played out, showing their history. And then there was that pivotal moment where she lost her dad and her hatred of cops, and that she, had to leave town, and she had big ambitions and big dreams, and she was so power and money hungry that that was really her motivator, and she played it well. She followed her her heart and mind, whether it was right or wrong. And I think she was good. Like, she was really, there was no point where you could kind of see through it, or you could kind of see her heart or her sensitive side. She was just cold, and she held her own. She held that strong.
I did think she pulled out a really good conflicted aspect of her character once you realized that the spirit was Denny Colt. And, and again, spoiler alert, but, the movie's 13 years old. So, you had your chance. I do like the fact that she still continued to do her own thing even afterwards. Didn't stick around. It wasn't one of those, oh, Denny, we can be together again. That would have taken away from the strength that Eva Mendes had given Sans Serif. Exactly. And I'm glad they didn't kind of go down that road. One of the other women in this movie that really made me smile with her character was Dana Caddick. Most people remember her from Castle, but she plays in this one Morgenstern, the rookie cop with a giant bazooka. and just eagerness for days. You ever see a character in a movie and every time they're on, no matter what they're doing, they kind of make you smile because, the way they're playing it is just so infectious? Stana Katic for me was this. And then you had Dan Lauria, who played Dolan. So Ellen's dad and the one person who knows that the spirit is actually Denny Colt. I think in the dictionary, if you put down film noir rugged detective who's seen a few miles, Dan Lauria's picture might actually be, beside the definition. He brought a lot more of that film noir aspect to this. And I again, Dan Lauria, I think, we've said it before about Chef's Kiss casting. I think he really fit that role as Dolan. Was there anyone else that kind of stood out for you in the film?
Paz Vega as Plaster Paris.
See, this is where, you and I might differ on this one, is that I didn't hate Paz Vega as Plaster de Paris, but I think it was one of those characters that just didn't need to be there. She pops out, she dances around, throws a couple of knives at the spirit, and, she's gone in about 10 minutes of the film, and about 7 minutes of that 10 minutes is the octopus monologuing. It felt extraneous to me. I didn't hate her as Plaster de Paris. I just didn't think... One thing about this movie that kind of stood out for me, and we had this same situation with Judge Dredd, in that neither Carrie or I had ever read a Judge Dredd comic before watching Judge Dredd the movie. I have never read a spirit comic book in my life. Carrie, I assume you're the same way?
Nope.
Not once. So we kind of got to go into this, fresh mind, fresh eyes, the world is our spirit oyster. But the thing with this movie is that it seemed to me, it took a lot for granted that you knew the characters, because all of a sudden, here's Paz Vega dancing around throwing knives at people. Who the hell is this person?
Yeah. Well, I mean, case in point is I actually had to research the backstory of the dynamic between the octopus and the spirit. Mm-hmm. Why is he such a hater? What is their history? What's his motivation?
I'm just trying to picture him now sitting in a chair with knives and just going, what is my motivation?
Sam Jackson doesn't need any motivation.
There is no motivation whatsoever.
He's motivated 110%
The octopus
all the time.
is motivation.
Yes.
That's pretty much it. We need a t-shirt that now says the octopus is motivation.
I think I want the t-shirt that says, the spirit is your oyster. Or, what was it you said?
The world is my spirit oyster.
The world is my spirit oyster. Yes.
We're going to make new merch for a 13-year-old movie, and it's going to sell, and it's going to work, and they're going to thank us for it.
Can we just talk about Arthur the cat here for a second? Arthur the cat.
Please do.
The fact that the cat is credited. Arthur the cat.
I mean, it is one of those things where, let's be honest, cats have a personality, usually that personality is go f*** yourself, but the cat very much plays the same kind of role as the crow in The Crow, right? You have that, not necessarily spirit animal, but you have that, that connection. Like clearly, Arthur, the cat is the connection between, the siren Lorelei and the spirit, and I get it, and I do. I understand why it's there, and I love that it's credited. It's a good cat. We're good with that, but it's.
I don't think the cat in Entropy, the smoking cat, got a credit. So
no,
there you go.
No, but speaking of the smoking cat,
it was in. It was in its contract.
I need to bring up speaking of the smoking cat, I need to bring up one of the comments from Twitter that we got before recording this show. The Shifty Bench podcast chimed in with, the movie's awful and the kitten murder scene is pure misguided schlock. Now, Arthur the cat didn't die. There was another cat that got killed. And
again, in his contract.
In his contract, yes. But I want to put it to you, right? Since we're talking, misguided schlock here. Did the kitty dissolving scene work for you?
No, it was awful.
See, I'm going to say something kind of controversial here. I didn't mind it. And I didn't mind it because of the way it was shot and the way it was done, right? Again, we have to bring up the fact that these villains are playing this as, big cartoony villains. Saturday morning style cartoon villains, and they are going to do Saturday morning style, bad things to prove their point. And dissolving a kitten kind of goes up, kind of falls in that, but it's not like they showed it like really dissolving too much, like, a little bit, and then like with the eyeballs rolling around. And awful, sure, awful. If you're a cat lover. But I think it was just campy enough that it wasn't for shock. And it wasn't for schlock. Schlock maybe. I can't disagree with that. But it definitely wasn't like, we're going to go full on Event Horizon and start ripping people's intestines out in the third act. It was very much just like, we're bad guys and we're going to prove it in the most bad guy way possible. It's very comic booky for us to do that. Right. Thank you to the Shifty Bench podcast for putting that out there and allowing us to talk about dissolving kittens on a podcast. I can't believe I just said that sentence myself. Okay. But I want to put it to you because I know they're not on my list. But the guy who played all of the henchmen. Oh,
my VIP. That would be Louis Lombardi. Mm-hmm. Yes, he played, by my count, 5 different characters in this movie.
At least.
And often in the same scene. Mm-hmm. So he was playing off of himself. He did it well. He was, he was very much the Three Stooges of...
One guy is all Three Stooges.
Of the movie.
He was Larry, Curly, and Moe, and maybe even Shep occasionally.
And the other guy.
Huevos and Rancheros.
Right. You know what? He was funny. There was maybe a little bit too much of it. It was almost like, okay, he's there for laughs, and then we're going to beat you over the head with it over and over again.
He was watching. Yeah, he was watching.
He was watching. He was good though. And you know what? I think I think it definitely it played an important part of the story. It was an important role. Mm-hmm. Had to be there. Maybe overdone.
I do get that, they are genetic creations by the octopus and by Silk and Floss, and I get the aspect of why they exist, and I get the importance of them being there, and I get the fact that they have to be stupid because they are not the best creations, and yeah, again, Saturday morning, you want some of those laughs, right? Again, if you think about those old Adam West era Batman TV shows, there's a lot that could be said about, the campiness of it. It is what it is. It's fun, but I think because it had such a darker tone, because it had, there was so much Sin City to the look, you're not expecting the Three Stooges to show up and start getting run over by trucks.
I think it's interesting how you would say that the movie had a darker tone. I think that
darker visuals.
I look at it completely different in that this movie did not take itself too seriously. It was fun. It was funny. it was maybe almost a little too comedic at times. Where, you know, as a first time viewer, I was kind of like, what? You know, what is happening here? Like, they're talking about some pretty heavy stuff, and yet they're throwing in humor.
I think that comes down to Frank Miller. And, you know, that's a perfect time for us to talk about Frank Miller, the director. This was Frank Miller's really one and only solo outing as a director, as far as a movie goes. He has 3 directing credits on IMDb. 2 of them are Sin City movies, and then there's this. And this is the only one where he's the only director involved. And I think that's tough, because yes, if his sole movie directing experience prior to this movie was Sin City, of course this is going to look like Sin City. He's a comic book guy, so of course the frames and the cinematography is going to have a comic book aesthetic to it. But, you know, we are, you know, in this 3 years away, you know, 3 years after Sin City, and then the trailer comes out, and people are like, oh, it's kind of like Sin City 2. And the trailer was very, very cool. I remember losing my ish when that trailer came out. I'm like, this is going to be so cool. It's going to be so awesome, because it had such a really cool vibe. And then they start backing the truck over, you know, Pathos or whoever, whichever one of the henchmen. I'm like, what is this? This is not what I signed up for. You know, we've talked about Event Horizon on this show before, how, you know, I went into that movie expecting a very cool sci-fi plot, and 3/4 of the film gave that to me, and then it turned into a horror film. If I went into this film initially thinking that it was going to be a, you know, more of a lighthearted, over-the-top Saturday morning kind of take on the film noir genre, then I think I could have appreciated it right off the bat. But that's not how it was marketed. It's not how it was, how it was trailered, and, you know, the initial thought process, I think, of viewers going into it. And that, I think that kind of took away from it. And I wonder if this movie would have done better if it looked less like Sin City and it looked more like Blade Runner.
You know, it's interesting. I actually believe in reading a quote from Frank Miller that he initially wasn't confident in his decision to adapt The Spirit for screen, and he wanted to turn it down, and then eventually realized that no, it wasn't as scary as he once thought, and he's actually he was quite glad to do it, and I think he did a really good job with it. He wanted to stay very much true to the original comic.
I think with leaving out certain things that made sense to leave out, but
which I think watching it had left certain plot holes. There were times where I was just confused of, well, how did we get here? But then I think that there were storylines that were really fleshed out and really well done. So it was kind of that weird balance of, good and bad. I think he did well with it. It would have been, I think, better as a 2-hour movie. Maybe just that little bit extra, that extra half an hour might have, been to his benefit. But
again, I do wonder if making it look like Sin City had looked is a detriment to the film, because you see that style and you expect that kind of feel. And Sin City, again, compared to this, is a much darker film. Bad things happen to bad people a lot in Sin City.
I disagree for 2 reasons. I think stylistically, that's Frank Miller's calling card. I think the black and white, the film noir, that's Frank Miller. So that had to be. That's a no-brainer.
Well, it has to be. There's the only movies he directed.
But the way that it was shot, the way that it was edited, the way that the scenes flowed.
There was definitely,
as you're reading the comic book.
There was a nice deft touch to the framing and the cinematography of it. And again, I don't disagree with how it looked, but I just wonder if it was false expectations because it looked the way it looked as far as the view, the movie going audience is concerned. I don't think it took away from the story. I think it took away from the box office and the ratings.
But whose fault is that really? Is that on Frank Miller for having a style, or is that on the viewer, the movie-going public who hears Frank Miller and expects a second Sin City, who hears Tarantino and expects the movie to be the next Pulp Fiction? Same thing with Robert Rodriguez. If you think or look at his filmography, he's got everything from, he can do anything. He's got Grindhouse to Spy Kids, right? And that's a wide range. So you really can't go into a movie or buy a ticket expecting what you've seen from that director before. I'm
going to argue that one. I mean, Robert Rodriguez is definitely the exception as far as style goes, because yes, he can go from a Desperado, Once Upon a Time in Mexico style to Shark Boy and Lava Girl, seamlessly. The only similarities there are going to be the actors that are probably starring in those roles. But I think with some directors, you go in, know who the director is, and you know what you're going to get. If you go to a Tarantino film, you're going to get a whole lot of really cool dialogue, probably not in chronological order, and there's going to be some blood, right? If you go to a John Woo film, you're going to get a whole lot of gun ballet and more slow-mo than you can shake a stick at.
But that mindset doesn't allow for reaching and for stretching their repertoire of what they're capable of. And I love seeing, like a Robert Rodriguez that has such a wide range.
I think there's also more of maybe it's a studio expectation, right? Where if Michael Bay does a film and the studio funds Michael Bay doing a film, they're going to expect him to Michael Bay all over the place and have big things go boom. Right? That's what you hire Michael Bay because you want big things to go boom. Right?
With that very same mindset, though, would you have put Sam Jackson as Mace Windu in Star Wars if he's going to kill every motherfucker in the room? I don't think Yoda would approve.
I think actors can get away with being different, right? Now, admittedly, some actors don't even bother anymore. Gary Sinise is going to be Gary Sinise in whatever Gary Sinise role he does. Christopher Walken is going to Christopher Walken all over the place because that's what he does, right? But most actors can kind of, it's okay for them to kind of go out of their norms. It doesn't surprise me when Samuel Jackson does a serious role and puts a lot of power into it because he can do that. He's that talented. But it also wouldn't surprise me if he dropped 17 F-bombs in the first 3 minutes of the film because he is Samuel L. Jackson. And I even love the fact that, the Marvel kind of plays up the fact that he is Samuel L. Jackson, finds little ways to, little bit of fan service. I'm flashing back to Captain Marvel here. Mother Flurkin, the Flurkin's a cat. He can say it. It sounds like a swear word, but he can say it. But with directors, though, right? And because it's a vision, right? Things are definitely, visualized by the one person. And maybe it's harder for a director to get out of their their own vision of things or the way they see things than it is for an actor whose job it is to be a chameleon.
Well, you know what? I think that's exactly where Robert Rodriguez's head was at when he pushed to have Frank Miller on the project. He was known for saying Frank Miller has lived Sin City, so he needs to be connected to this project. Like he didn't feel that he could do it honors.
Yeah, and that makes sense because Frank Miller created the Sin City comic book, right? Like his graphic novels were a production Bible, so it made sense for Rodriguez to bring him on to Sin City as a director, regardless of what he had to do it. But when Frank Miller's in the director's chair alone, Robert Rodriguez isn't there to really kind of steer the way, right? That's an entirely different situation. I would love if Frank Miller got back into the director's chair, made sure that he didn't make his next movie look like Sin City or look like The Spirit, grounded in a little bit of reality. Right?
Interesting, because I would absolutely love to see a Marvel movie done in the visuals of Frank Miller, done in the style of Sin City. Whether it's a spin-off on, I don't know, Thanos or
I don't know if you could do that per se, but definitely maybe an episode of What If. You could kind of get away with that. Moon Knight might have been the closest possible character that could have done that, but they're going with the Marvel look for that one. Even though I think it's going to be one of the darker Marvel movies, or at least TV shows, that will have come out because Moon Knight is that kind of character. But yes, if Frank Miller directed a Moon Knight film, that would be cool. That would be very, very cool. I don't know if I want it to look like The Spirit, but it'd be very, very cool. But part of this too is that the movie itself, The Spirit, when it starts, it very much feels like that 1940s film noir, movie serial kind of feel. And then the jokes come. And then all of a sudden people are using computers and cell phones. And I think it had noble intentions of fitting into that film noir milieu, but it's almost like they wrote themselves into a corner and said, well, here we go. Cell phones and computers for everybody. It's no longer a 1940s film. Did that take you out of the setting when you started to see some of these devices come out?
To be honest, it was actually kind of lost on me. I just kind of took it for what it was. I didn't draw attention to it. Although watching, there were definitely some scenes that were hard to watch in that they were very much presented in perhaps the different mindset from the 1940s versus 2008. There were, some costume choices or topics that they addressed that it was like, ooh, would that really still be greenlit today?
I will agree that there are some points in the film where you sit there going, oh, why is he in a Nazi outfit and, standing in front of the swastika and monologuing like an evil villain? But as head shaking as that may be, I think that's actually where the tonality of the octopus in Silken Floss really kind of pulled it back from the brink. Because if it was a dark film, like if it was a Sin City where there's no jokes whatsoever and, it's an entire town of bad people, then that kind of imagery just takes it that much further. But the fact that you have, a very campy kind of villain with a big monologuing set piece with complete over-the-top imagery, because it's so out there, it almost takes away from the imagery, which I'm kind of fine with because, I get that the comic came out in 1940 and was around in the 1940s, and there are a lot of 1940s sensibilities about the character and the backstory. But the minute you go camp, the minute you start to make jokes, it kind of saves it. But the thing is, there's a lot of, there's past proof that you could do, for lack of a better term, a period or style piece and get away with it. And I bring up 2004's Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow, which I think is maybe the best example of how it could work, because much like The Spirit and much like Sin City, it was shot almost entirely green screen. All the sets are digital. Most of the props are digital, and it felt like that Flash Gordon era black and white movie serial kind of feel, and it stuck to the tone. And you could have a little bit of that, that kind of fun dialogue where it's just like, okay, yeah, these characters are going to be, not necessarily fully serious in the moment, but they're still kind of serious enough. Sky Captain and the World Tomorrow is a great period piece, even though it's done decades after the period that it's set in. Sin City is very much a period piece, just a much darker period. I think The Spirit doesn't quite know where it wants to fit, even though, because that's the thing, it looks like a darker film visually, but it plays like a much campier Saturday morning film. One of the things I wanted to point out was the music. And this is not a knock on it, because I think the music in the film it was really well done. But I mentioned earlier about the trailer and those kind of, false expectations that you get when you see something. And we've all had that moment where we've seen a movie or seen a trailer and we're like, oh, it's going to be so good. It's going to be awesome. And we get there and it's not. This was kind of one of those situations where the trailer, especially the first one, the trailer for The Spirit looked and sounded amazing. It is so cool. And I remember, going like, well, what's this song? This music is great. All the music from the trailers that came out done by one group. The group is called Hybrid, and all the songs came off of their album I Choose Noise. The first one specifically was a song called Choke. And I remember watching, I was like, if this is the feel of the movie, with this kind of music and this kind of tonality and this kind of imagery, this is going to be the coolest movie ever. It wasn't. It's still good, but the trailer and the movie itself have such a different feel. And I'm sure you could, off the top of your head, list a bunch of movies where it's like, oh yeah, the trailer made it look so good, and it was so just not what was in the trailer.
Or when they play a song in the trailer and it's nowhere to be found in the movie.
Looking at you, Suicide Squad. Looking at you.
Pump up the volume.
Yeah, but Suicide Squad, that Bohemian Rhapsody trailer for Suicide Squad was great. And I'm like, oh, this is going to be so good. And Suicide Squad will probably end up being on this show at some point. I'm sure
we're going to be talking about that one day, but
I'm sorry.
It'll be hard to find something that's not that bad.
I'm not looking forward to that day. I'm not going to lie.
You know what, though? I do have to give props to Christina Aguilera's cover of Falling in Love Again, too. Mm-hmm. We just have to say, for the closing credits, beautifully done.
Yeah. But I mean, as far as the aesthetics go, the costuming was great. It was all good. The again, very stylish, very, very cool. The fact that they shot this whole thing in 50 days, like, that is incredible. When you think about how much work went into it, that's gonna be a hard 50 days, and because everything's green screen too, you're not quite sure kind of what's gonna be around you when everything's going on. Like, that's gonna be a challenge for actors.
Well, especially for Louis Lombardi, where he's playing off of himself in the scene. So, yeah, I mean, that would be incredibly challenging unless they had a stand-in. But even at that, yeah, I mean, I am curious though, how long the post-production process.
Oh, I'm sure that went on forever.
That's no doubt that's where the magic happened. And, you know, that's a point I wanted to make too with the trailer is, you know, clearly if you have the right editor, if you have the right storyteller, you can make any movie seem 10 times better.
Oh, absolutely.
And, you know, that's where it starts. And that's what gets people into the theaters. So my question then is, if the trailer was that good and the trailer is what hooked your attention and made you want to watch this, then what happened? How is it that people weren't, because it didn't even have the draw, like it didn't have the box office spank.
No, it didn't. I mean, part of that could very well be that here you are releasing a comic book movie that looks like Sin City, you know, on Christmas Day, right? Like,
not a Christmas movie.
Not a Christmas movie. A lot of snow in the movie, not a Christmas movie. And the thing with 2008, you know, when you think about it, it's like we had Iron Man. We had our first Iron Man film, and if memory serves me, I think The Incredible Hulk came out around that time as well. The problem is The Incredible Hulk was not exactly the most well-received film either. It's not as, you know, downwardly regarded as The Spirit, but, you know, it's no Iron Man. The Incredible Hulk is often listed as one of the worst MCU movies of all time, even though I actually didn't mind it that much. You know, Incredible Hulk is actually pretty good. I'll give them that. I know what my least favorite MCU movie is. It's not The Incredible Hulk.
Ooh, what is it?
It's Thor: The Dark World. Like, second Thor movie is the only one I consistently fall asleep to. By the way, if you're having trouble falling asleep in these you know, pandemic times, go ahead and watch Thor: The Dark World. It will cure your insomnia. And that's saying a lot from the MCU. So let's put it out there. I'm just curious, Twitterverse, if there's a movie that the trailer looked so good and the movie was not, I want to know what movie that is. So hit us up at Not That Badcast. Let me know. I'm just curious what trailers oversold the film. Speaking of Twitter, we mentioned earlier that the Shifty Bench podcast had chimed in. There's a couple of other mentions on Twitter about this film. The So Wizard podcast chimed in with, "It's really, really bad. Scarlett Johansson is hot. That's about it." Which I find funny, not in the complete obviousness that Scarlett Johansson is hot, but the fact that she's not the femme fatale in this by any stretch of the imagination. You know, she wasn't dolled up to be hot and sexy, yet here she is still looking pretty good in this film. Then there's the FJ podcast, and they chimed in with, "It's pretty bad. Sure, the hyper-stylized look of the movie is admirable and expected coming from such a visual artist as Frank Miller, but his screenplay belies his strengths as a writer, and it's clear who handled much of the directing on Sin City." That one fair?
Ooh, that's harsh. You know what? I don't think it's fair. And I honestly think Frank Miller did a great job with this, with the story of the Spirit. And turning it into a very comic book-esque type film. Yes, done in the visual vein of Sin City, because that's his style. You know, I really think the movie was given a raw deal. Like, I think it deserves more. It truly wasn't that bad.
No, it's definitely not that bad. It's not a 14% movie by any stretch of the imagination. But I put a challenge out there to all of you. I'm going to ask you to watch the movie again. You can find it on Prime Video. But before you go into watching this, A, stop thinking it's a bad movie. But B, stop thinking Sin City. Start thinking Adam West Batman. Start thinking like that, and all of a sudden, some of these set pieces and some of these moments in the film really stand out as maybe that's the motivation, or maybe that's the way it was played out, and you might have a better appreciation of the film. But again, that's just perspective. That's just your mindset going in. Like if you go into a movie expecting Star Wars and you get Tarantino, you're going to be very, very, very confused, much as I think, that movie would be, which is why I'm really happy I don't think Tarantino is going to do that Star Trek film. I'd be curious to see what he would do with an episode of a Star Trek series, but I don't know if I'd want to see a full Quentin Tarantino Star Trek film.
Oh, I do.
Really?
I do.
Space Gimp and all? No.
No, because again, I'm a big fan of producers, directors, writers stretching from what they're known for and being creative and having that creative license to create and to do something different. And I think that is incredibly awesome that give them a chance, right? And again, I think it's on the viewer to have that expectation and to dislike a movie because it didn't meet your expectations. Mm-hmm. Well, whose fault is that? If you don't go into something with a preconceived expectation and just accept it for what it is, then that's a really cool opportunity. And yeah, I do. I want to see. I want to see Tarantino direct anything. I just want to see new films. But
I also want to put it out there, as far as proximity goes in the release of this film. We mentioned that 2008 was the start of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But we need to be very, very honest here in that comic book movies before Iron Man, maybe not the best movies out there. And, you're thinking, The Punisher and Daredevil and Elektra. There are some not so good comic book movies out there. There's The Crow. I think The Crow was very much an outlier in that it pulled off dark in that time frame of when comic book movies were coming out and they weren't all that good. But to that token, Iron Man set a very high bar as far as what a comic book movie could be. It was always in that realization that, this is what it's supposed to look like. So I wonder if the Spirit had come out Christmas Day 2007 as opposed to 2008, does it do better? Because it doesn't have to follow the Iron Man Act.
It's so interesting, and I love that you mentioned The Crow, because in the back of my mind, I was thinking, I would love to see Frank Miller stylize The Crow to create the story from what it was intended from the graphic novel in the style of Frank Miller.
And
I want to see that.
I'd be fine with that. I'd be much more fine with that than some of the sequels that came out after The Crow.
The Crow 2?
Exactly. Or The Crow 3.
There was a third?
Oh, God. There is a lot of Crow that we could talk about on this show. Now, that being said, Crow 2, not a great movie, phenomenal soundtrack.
Oh, yeah.
There's your key point for Crow 2, Crow City of Angels there. That soundtrack was killer. But let's get back to the Spirit here, because it's time to name our MVP of 2008's The Spirit. So, Carrie, who is it for you?
I'm struggling here. my first instinct is always vote Sam Jackson. Always go for Sam J. However, props to Scarlett Johansson. She takes the lead on this one. I have to, I have to say that she really played her part so well that I give her the MVP.
I will agree that Scarlett Johansson brought so much to Silk and Floss. It really made her very memorable, almost iconic, I would say. Because there's just such a nonchalance about her, but that just shows how smart Silk and Floss actually is. And it shows that the octopus might be just a means to an end for her. There's so much depth in there, but she's not my MVP.
You had, before you name your MVP, I am curious because you had mentioned that Silk and Floss set the tone for The Spirit too.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, with everything said, is that a movie you want to see?
That's a very good question. I'd be curious what a Silk and Floss centric movie would look like. And the funny thing is, we're seeing properties now where the villains are taking the lead role. You think about the Loki series. You think about the Venom movie.
Yeah, Carnage.
Exactly. There are villain-led movies. I think I would be curious if they ever did a Spirit 2. We don't need to bring in extra characters. We could just have Silk and Floss basically saying, I don't need the octopus. I'm better than the octopus, and provide a much better challenge for Denny Colt. I think Silk and Floss could easily, and of course Scarlett Johansson is freaking phenomenal in pretty much everything we've seen her in, and she's adaptable to pretty much any comic book movie. Of course, Black Widow, no problem there. This movie, not a problem. Ghost World, yep, it's a comic book movie. So like Scarlett Johansson, is, for lack of a better term, the geek movie royalty. And we put her in that. I'm fine with Silk and Floss being the main villain of another Spirit film. But my MVP vote has to go to Sarah Paulson. And I think part of that is because I wanted this movie to be more film noir and less Saturday morning. I was fine with, kind of how it ended up. But she is very much the character that I think if they ever made it a bit more serious or a bit more film noir, Sarah Paulson wouldn't have to change at all. Ellen was such a compassionate character in this that you felt for her every time the Spirit pissed her off. You felt for her every time, like she ran to his side to help him get better. You knew that there was more of that backstory, and the fact that she doesn't know that the Spirit is Denny Colt, and because her and Denny Colt were together before he was killed. There's so much of that conflict in there that again, I think Sarah Paulson could have been used more in this film. I think you could have taken out some characters and put more of that dynamic in, but that's for a remake somewhere down the road. But Sarah Paulson, I think, is the standout MVP of The Spirit. But now that we've gone through all of this, I have to toss it to you. 14% tomato meter, 25% audience score. Did either of them get it right, or are they both in the wrong ballpark?
No, I think it deserves more respect than that.
I would be curious what you would give it. On a scale of 100%, 0 to 100, where would you put The Spirit? It's a tough one.
That's a really tough question, because I certainly didn't dislike it. It really wasn't that bad, and it certainly deserves more than 14%. but I'm struggling only because I want to see it around the 50% mark, but I still can't.
It's not quite there.
There were too many holes. So I'm kind of thinking like 40.
It does feel like a 40%
Like a
film.
43 maybe.
Yeah. I mean, is it a great movie? No. Is it a horrible movie? No.
Would I watch it again? Hell's yeah.
Heck yeah. And that I think is the end, like the deciding factor. You know, if the movie is something you can safely say, yeah, I'd watch it again and be fine with it, then it's not a 14%, right? That's the kind of movie you sit there and, you know, it becomes almost, you know, torture to have to watch it again, you know? So, you know, 14% is, you know, The Dead Don't Die. If you remember that movie that we sat through in the theater and questioned ourselves why we were still there by the end of the movie. I know people like The Dead Don't Die. It was not that good. That's just personal. That's just personal opinion. But I think I agree with you. I think 40% fits more of this the benefits, but also acknowledges that it could be more. And I think that if you tweak a few things or if you remade it with a few different things, I think then yes, absolutely, it could maybe get to that 50, 60, 70%, but it's not there yet.
I still wonder though. I mean, with the actors who played their roles perfectly, I mean, we found nothing wrong with any one of the big names in this movie. Even the smaller parts were played very well and very intriguing. It stayed true to the comic book and the overall storyline. I think yes, there were a few holes, but why is it that we agree that we can't pass that 50% threshold? Why can we not? Like, what is it?
I think the FJ podcast really kind of nailed it on the head in that it's not the strongest script, you know. There was a lot I find. I mean, like, let's be honest. The whole plot of the film, you know, is that, you know, the octopus is trying to get, you know, a hold of the blood of Hercules, or Heracles as he keeps on pronouncing it. But there's all this side stuff going on, and there's a lot of characters there where it's like, who the hell are you? Who the hell are you? Where did this person come from?
Yeah.
I think if you take the movie, remove some of the characters that don't need to be there. Plaster du Perry doesn't need to be there. Morgenstern, as much as I loved her in this, doesn't need to be there. That's an angle that you don't need. Narrow the focus to the task at hand with a little bit of the mystery thrown in as to, you know, why the spirit can't die. How does the octopus know about this? And, you know, I don't mind the sans serif line in that, there's a longing for the love that the spirit used to have, yet he's still also in love with Ellen, even though he can't tell either of them that he's Denny Colt. Like there's a lot that could be done there with a lot fewer characters. And I'm sorry, get rid of the hench. Get rid of the hench. You don't need them, or at least have them, but don't make them such a big thing of it. And I think if you narrow the focus,
one or two scenes and that's it, because
it became a shtick. It became and I'm going back to I'm going to make a Peter Pan reference here, right? We don't need more Shmi. We don't. We need more Hook, right? We don't need more of pathos and logos and huevos and rancheros and bozos and however many more things you can come up with. We need more octopus, more silk and floss, no plaster de Paris. You know, again, keep it simple, right? It's Batman versus the Joker. It's not Batman versus the Joker and this henchman and this henchman and this henchman and this henchman. Like, we don't care, right? They're cannon fodder. right? They are instant expendable with the red shirt. Don't need them. If they gotta die, they gotta die, but they don't need to be characters. They just need to be set pieces, right? And I know that's a harsh thing to say, but in this case, I think it took away from the main story of the spirit and it just became a gag that got used over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
They did take valuable real estate of the hour and 30 plus minutes.
And I think with that, even if it still looked like Sin City, and even if it still came out when it came out, I think it's better if you take out some of the unnecessary bloat of the film. But that's the thing, right? It's a 40% now. It could be better if it made changes. Carrie, thank you so much for joining in for this episode of It's Not That Bad. To our listeners, I want to know what you think about the spirit. So hit us up at Not That Badcast. Also, if you want to join in on the fun, let me know if there is a movie that you think is unfairly maligned, or on the other side of things, if it's just so bad that you don't think there's any chance in hell that we can actually find anything good to say about it. Let me know on Twitter at Not That Badcast and put it out there. Let us know and we'll watch it. We'll dissect it. We will find good things to talk about it, and we're going to have a ton of fun along the way. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of It's Not That Bad, the podcast that looks for A grades and B movies. Until next time, take care.
Hey folks, Stefan Shirazi and Renee Richardson here from the Metallica Report.
And we are proud members of the Pantheon podcast family, where the best of music and podcasts unite.
We've got something pretty cool for you. We're giving away an exclusive Metallica merch package worth over $250.
That's a whole lot of Scary Guys, skulls, M72, and other sought-after Metallica swag. And we've made it easy for you to win. Follow and share the Metallica Report, and you're in the game. Go to pantheonpodcast.com/Metallica, enter your email, and hit that button to be entered to win.
And just like that, you're eligible for our monthly exclusive Metallica merch package.
And guess what, rockers? You can enter every month, so just do it. And while we love our global brothers and sisters, the lawyers won't let us ship outside the U.S.